My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 47 years old. And on a Tuesday morning, April 8th, while I was standing in my sun-drenched kitchen loading the dishwasher, I died. There was no thunderclap, no dramatic, cinematic warning. Just the quiet, unassuming end of a life I had believed to be completely, wonderfully, boringly normal. Before that moment, my existence was a symphony of ordinary things. I lived in a small, quiet town in North Carolina, the kind of place where you know your mailman's name and the high school football schedule is front page news. My husband Brandon and I had been married for 23 years, building a life together one leaky faucet and school bake sale at a time. We had two beautiful kids. Our son Tyler was navigating his first year of college, and our daughter Katie was deep in the dramatic throes of middle school. That morning had been a perfect composition of our life's music. It began with the percussive drip 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 of the coffee maker, a sound more reliable than any alarm clock. Then came the chaotic crescendo of Katie frantically searching for her history textbook, the bass thump of Brandon's footsteps on the stairs, and the smell of slightly burnt toast filling the air. I moved through it all like a conductor who knew every note by heart, making lunches, signing permission slips, reminding Brandon about the oil change in the van. He kissed my cheek on his way out the door, his familiar scent of aftershave and coffee a fleeting comfort. "Love you, El," he'd said, his mind already on a morning meeting. "Love you too," I'd replied, my own mind already jumping 3 steps ahead to the parent-teacher conferences I had that afternoon. It was a love as comfortable and automatic as breathing. My faith was much the same. It was a quiet thing, like a comfortable old blanket I kept folded in a cedar chest at the foot of my bed. I believed in God, I believed in Jesus. But he felt distant, a respected historical figure, not an intimate presence you talk to while scrubbing dried egg off a plate. My prayers were like quick, dutiful notes jotted in the margins of my day's overflowing to-do list. A quick thank you before dinner, a hurried please keep them safe before my head hit the pillow. I believed, a good person, just a regular woman trying to pay the bills on a teacher's aide salary, raise decent kids, and maybe find a moment to sit down before 10 o'clock at night. I never imagined something like this could happen to me. I thought that kind of life-altering drama was for other people, for stories you see on the internet while scrolling on your phone, only half paying attention. But it did happen. After the front door closed and the school bus rumbled away, a profound silence descended on the house. It was just me and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I looked at the kitchen, the yellow curtains my mother had helped me sew, the half-eaten piece of toast Katie had left on the counter, and felt the familiar, gentle pressure of the day's tasks. I picked up the stray breakfast dishes, carried them to the sink, and turned on the water. 1 second I was rinsing a blue coffee cup, the warm water sluicing over my hands, my mind sorting through the names of the parents I would meet that afternoon. The next second I was gone. It wasn't a sound you would hear with your ears. It was a feeling, a faint and final tremor deep in the architecture of my mind. A strange little pop behind my eyes, as soft and profound as the sound of a star giving out in the silent vacuum of space. It was the sound of a single, crucial thread snapping in the tapestry of my life. For a timeless half-second, nothing happened. The water still ran over my hands, the blue mug was still solid in my grip, and the list of parents I needed to speak with was still scrolling through my thoughts. And then the world began to unravel. First, the sound of the running water changed. It began to stretch, the familiar, comforting rush thinning out into a high, metallic whine, like a recording being slowed to a crawl. Then, as if a divine hand were slowly turning a cosmic volume knob, it simply faded away. The silence that rushed in to replace it was unlike any quiet I had ever known. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty house. It was a deep, pressurized, absolute silence, a total absence of vibration. It was the sound of my own life being muted. Then the world tilted. Not in a dizzy spell, but as if the very laws of physics had grown tired. The floor seemed to slant away from me at an impossible angle. My vision began to tunnel, the cheerful yellow of my kitchen curtains turning a sickly, washed-out gray at the edges of my sight. The light from the window, once so bright and warm, became thin and sterile. I felt a sudden, bizarre sense of detachment from my own body. My hand, still clutching the coffee mug, no longer felt like my own. It was a strange, distant object at the end of a limb I couldn't quite control. I was becoming a ghost in my own skin. I felt an impossible sensation of being both incredibly heavy and utterly weightless. A crushing pressure was building inside my head, yet my body felt as though it could float away from the floor. The darkness that had been creeping in at the edges of my vision began to close in, not like a switch being flipped, but like a slow, final curtain of black velvet being drawn across the stage. There was no pain, only a profound and terrifying confusion. My last coherent thought was not a prayer, not a plea, but a fragmented, desperate reach for the very symphony that was ending. Bran's coity. The thought never finished. The blackness consumed everything. The pressure, the confusion, the fatting light, the memory of my family's names, it was all extinguished. There was nothing. The absolute nothingness did not last. There was no sense of time passing, no slow return to consciousness. One moment there was a void. The next there was sight. But it was a sight without eyes. I was pure awareness, floating gently like a soap bubble near the ceiling of my own kitchen. The world was impossibly clear, more real than real. I could see the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams slanting through the window, the intricate grain of the oak cabinets, the faint, greasy fingerprint on the microwave door. It was a panoramic 360-degree view. I was everywhere at once, and I was calm. The frantic to-do list mind of Eleanor Vance was gone, replaced by a profound, analytical stillness. Then I looked down, and my calm, analytical mind was presented with a fact that it could not process. I saw my kitchen exactly as it was. I saw the yellow curtains, the half-eaten piece of toast on the counter. And I saw myself. I was crumpled on the floor between the dishwasher and the sink, my legs twisted at an unnatural angle. My cheek was pressed against the cool linoleum, and my eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing. The blue coffee mug I had been holding had rolled a few inches away, a small, lonely island of color on the white floor. There was no fear. The sight of my own discarded body sparked no more alarm than seeing a coat I'd dropped on a chair. It was a profound and surreal detachment, as if I were watching a movie about a woman who looked remarkably like me. The serene silence of my new reality was suddenly shattered. I didn't hear a sound with ears, but I felt it, a wave of raw, primal terror that ripped through the very fabric of the room. Brandon! He ran into the kitchen, a half-empty coffee cup still in his hand, stopping so abruptly that hot liquid sloshed over his fingers. He didn't seem to notice. His face, the face I had loved for 23 years, collapsed into a mask of pure horror. Oh God, Eleanor's. The sound of my name was a muffled, desperate cry that I perceived as a spike of agonizing energy. He dropped to his knees beside my body and started shaking me, his movements clumsy with panic. Eleanor, wake up. Oh God, please wake up. I could see the frantic terror in his eyes, the dawning understanding that this was not a simple fall. I watched as he fumbled for his phone, his fingers trembling too much to unlock it on the first try. I saw the desperate, useless way he pressed his hands on my chest, trying to remember the CPR course he'd taken a decade ago. And my entire being, this new, formless consciousness, ached with a single, impossible desire to comfort him. It's okay, honey, I'm right here, don't be scared. The thoughts were as clear and real as my own existence, but they were trapped inside me. I had no voice to soothe him, no body to hold him. I was a viewer, a helpless ghost watching the greatest tragedy of my husband's life unfold. And that feeling of powerlessness was the first and only pain I felt in that place. As I watched his heart break, I felt a new sensation. A gentle, loving pull, a tug not from the tragic scene below, but from somewhere else entirely, from behind me, above me, everywhere. I was being called away. The pull was the gentlest, most powerful force I have ever known. It wasn't a physical sensation, but a summons that resonated in the very center of my new consciousness. It was like a golden thread had been attached to my soul my entire life, and now someone on the other end was tenderly, lovingly reeling me in. My focus, which had been painfully fixed on Brandon's grief, was drawn away from the scene of my own death, away from the life I had just left. I turned my awareness from the tragedy in the yellow kitchen and faced the source of the call. There was nothing to see, yet everything to feel. As my attention shifted, the world I had known began to dissolve. It did not simply fade, it unraveled. The solid walls of my kitchen grew thin and transparent, becoming like smoke or a shimmering heat haze. The frantic, heartbreaking sound of my husband's voice, now joined by the distant, approaching wail of sirens, began to fray. The individual sounds separated from the chaos, becoming single threads of vibration that stretched, thinned, and then dissolved into a greater silence that was waiting to receive them. I saw Brandon, my beloved Brandon, become a translucent, flickering image, his anguish a memory that was already losing its sharp, painful edges. And as the scene dematerialized, I felt the earthly tethers on my soul begin to loosen and fall away. The fierce, anxious love I had for my family, a love that was always intertwined with worry and fear, was not extinguished. Instead, it was transformed. It was as if the love was being purified by this new reality, burned clean of all its earthly anxiety. The frantic need to protect, to provide, to control was replaced by a vast, serene, and all-knowing peace. I understood with a certainty that required no thought that my children would be cared for, that my husband would somehow endure. My love for them hadn't vanished. It had expanded beyond the confines of a single human heart into something eternal and unshakable. With that final release, the last anchor holding me to that shore of existence was lifted. I wasn't scared. The very concept of fear was a foreign language my soul could no longer comprehend. This was not an abduction, it was a rescue. This was not a journey into the unknown, it was a return to the only place I had ever truly belonged. The feeling intensified with every passing moment, a profound, soul-deep recognition that washed away 63 years of feeling like a stranger on a strange land. I was not being pulled into the dark. I was being called home. The last vestiges of my kitchen, my husband, and my world dissolved completely, leaving me in a place of perfect tranquility. I was in a realm with no walls, no ceiling, no floor. There were no dimensions, no up or down, no near or far. It was not a darkness, which implies an absence of light, nor was it bright. It was a gentle, velvety, twilight state of being, a space that felt both infinite in its expanse and as intimate as a held breath. The silence was the first thing I truly noticed. On Earth, silence is merely the absence of noise. Here, the silence was a presence. It was a living, breathing stillness that wrapped around my soul, holding me, quieting me, and healing me. It was a silence that was pregnant with a love so pure and profound, it felt like the background radiation of creation itself. In that breathing stillness, I felt the burdens of my life begin to lift away. It was a gentle, tangible unburdening, as if invisible hands were reaching into my soul and removing heavy stones I had carried for so long I'd forgotten their weight. I felt the knot of anxiety I always carried about our mortgage simply untie and dissolve. The constant, low-grade worry about Tyler's college tuition and Katie's teenage struggles detached from me and vanished into the peace. The insecurity I harbored about whether I was a good enough wife, a patient enough mother, a kind enough person, all of it just lifted off of me, no longer relevant, no longer a part of my definition. It was more than just my worries that disappeared. It was me. The very identity of Eleanor Vance, the carefully constructed persona I had spent 47 years building and maintaining, began to fade. The roles of wife, mother, teacher's aide, daughter, friend, they all fell away like discarded garments. What was left was the pure, unburdened essence of my being, a single point of awareness floating in an ocean of peace. This was the first true rest I had ever known. It was not the rest of sleep, which is a temporary reprieve from exhaustion. It was the rest of the soul, a complete cessation from the exhausting, lifelong effort of being someone. I could have stayed in that perfect state of being for an eternity. But then something shifted in the gentle twilight. Ahead of me, or perhaps inside of me, for distance had no meaning here, a light was born. It began as a tiny pinprick, no bigger than a single distant star in a perfectly clear night sky. It didn't burst into existence, it simply emerged from the stillness, as if the loving silence had concentrated itself into a single point of luminance. It didn't burn or radiate heat in a physical sense, but I felt its warmth in my very core. The peace that already filled me began to deepen and orient itself toward this new, beautiful star. It was not just a light. It was a destination. It was an invitation. And my soul, now free of all its earthly weight, felt an effortless, joyful desire to draw closer. There was no sense of walking or flying. My desire was the only engine I needed. As the yearning to be in that distant light grew within me, the light itself seemed to expand to meet me, closing the infinite distance not by my travel, but by its grace. It was a mutual, loving approach, a cosmic dance of a soul returning to its source. The closer I got, the more I understood that my desire for it was just a faint echo of its desire for me. I wanted to be in that light more than I had ever wanted anything in my life, because I was beginning to realize it was the only thing I had ever truly wanted. As the light grew, consuming my awareness, I could see that it was not merely an object or a phenomenon. It was a person, a being, a man whose form was sculpted from a substance I can only describe as living, liquid joy. The light that composed him was alive, swirling and moving in breathtaking patterns of colors that have no name on earth. There was a blue that felt like the deepest peace, a gold that hummed with ancient wisdom, and a crystalline white that was the very essence of purity. It was brighter than 10,000 suns, yet it did not hurt to look. In fact, to behold him was to feel my own soul being healed, my own awareness being made more whole. He was not wearing a white robe or sandals, as the paintings had always shown. He was simply light and love, perfectly contained in the shape of a man. His face, I cannot describe it with the clumsy words of my old life, but I will never forget it. It was a paradox of perfect beauty. It was the face of a single, distinct individual, yet somehow it held the features of everyone I had ever loved. It was ancient, etched with the wisdom of galaxies and eons, yet it was young, filled with the fresh, vibrant energy of creation's first morning. But it was his eyes that held me. His eyes contained every star in the universe, and as they looked at me, I felt the full, unsparing, and unbelievably loving weight of his gaze. In that single look, I was known. It was not a review, it was a revelation. Every secret I had ever kept, every shameful thought I had ever harbored, every time I had been unkind, every lie I had told, every single mistake, he saw it all in a timeless instant. But he didn't just see the act, he saw the fear that motivated the lie. He saw the pain that fueled the anger. He saw the insecurity that drove the pride. He didn't just see what I had done, he understood with perfect, heartbreaking empathy why I had done it. And there was not a molecule of judgment in him. There was only love. This love was not an emotion, it was a physical force, a tangible energy that radiated from him in palpable waves. It struck my soul like a warm, cleansing tidal wave, and in its path, every last vestige of self-doubt and guilt I had ever carried was simply washed away. The force of it buckled my spiritual knees, and I just began to weep. It was not the weeping of sadness or grief, but a torrent of pure, unadulterated relief. It was the cry of a lifelong exile who had finally, against all hope, found her way home. I didn't have to ask who he was. My soul, the very core of my being, knew him with a certainty that was more fundamental than my own name. It was Jesus. His voice was not a sound that traveled through space to be heard by ears. It was a thought that bloomed inside my soul, a communication of pure feeling that was clearer than any spoken word. The meaning and the emotion were one and the same. Welcome, Eleanor, the feeling resonated within me, a sound like 1,000 waterfalls and a quiet whisper all at once. You are home, be at peace. In that moment of welcome, I felt every broken piece of myself, every fractured hope and hidden wound I had carried through life, being seamlessly and perfectly put back together. I was whole. We simply stood in that shared reality for a timeless moment, and he let me soak in his peace. It felt like an eternity and a single second all at once. Then the quality of his attention shifted. The boundless, welcoming love was still there, but it became more focused, more intentional, like a lens being adjusted. He looked at me with so much tenderness, and I knew, with a sudden dawning awareness, that we were about to speak of my life. A ghost of my old, earthly self flickered within me, and with it came a flash of fear. The primal fear of the final exam, of the great judgment, of a cosmic ledger being opened to reveal a balance sheet found wanting. I braced my soul for a review of my sins, a list of my failings. But it wasn't what I expected. He didn't pull out a scroll or a great book. He simply looked into my heart with that same, unwavering love. "I have 3 questions for you, little one," he communicated, the term of endearment dissolving my fear before it could take root. "They are the questions I ask of everyone." I knew, with a certainty that was terrifying and liberating, that the answers would come from the deepest part of my being, and that there would be no room for the polite little lies I told even to myself. He leaned in, and the light that composed him grew warmer, more intimate. "The first question," he said gently, "is this: did you let me love you?" I paused. The question short-circuited my entire understanding of faith. It was so simple, yet it made no sense. My mind, still running on its old earthly programming, had been prepared for the opposite question: did you love me? That was a question I had an answer for, a list of evidence I could present. I began to stammer, giving the pre-rehearsed, Sunday school answer my whole life had trained me to give. I tried to, Lord. I went to church most Sundays. I prayed. I tried to be a good person. I read my Bible sometimes. He held up a hand made of starlight, and the light that emanated from it gently silenced me. "That is how you tried to love me, Eleanor," he communicated, his grace so profound that there was no hint of rebuke, only clarification. "I am asking, did you let me love you?" And then he showed me. It wasn't a memory replayed on a screen. It was a re-immersion into a feeling. I was back in my bedroom from just a few months before, kneeling beside my bed in the dark. I saw myself head bowed, hands clasped, going through my list of worries. I was telling God what I needed, what I was afraid of, what I was sorry for. My prayer was a broadcast of anxieties, a monologue of requests sent up into the heavens. But then Jesus gave me his perspective. He showed me that in that very room, his love was a tangible presence, a warm, golden light pouring out toward me, waiting patiently to be received. But my heart was closed off. It was a fortress, its gates barred not by sin, but by my own self-sufficiency. I was so busy talking, so focused on listing my needs and my failures, that I never once fell silent. I never just stopped, opened my hands, and let his love in. "You spent your life trying to send a small river of devotion up to me," he explained, the truth of it landing with devastating clarity. "All the while, I was sending an ocean of love down to you, but in your heart, you had built a dam." The truth of his words resonated through me, and he immediately gave them form. I was plunged back into my life, back into a moment from just a few weeks before. I was at the elementary school, standing in the main office. I had made a small, stupid mistake. I had misplaced a student's confidential file right before a meeting with his parents. The error was fixable, but I felt a hot, sickening wave of shame wash over me. I relived the feeling with excruciating clarity, the flush in my cheeks, the frantic apology, the cringing feeling of my own incompetence. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed for hours, my mind a torture chamber of self-recrimination, replaying my foolishness on an endless loop. "I'm so stupid," the thoughts echoed. "I should have been more careful. What must they think of me?" I was forced to feel the full, heavy weight of that self-imposed shame. But then Jesus showed me the scene again, this time from his perspective. He showed me that as I lay there, drowning in my own judgment, he was right there with me. His love was not a distant sentiment. It was a warm, golden river of pure grace flowing from the heart of the universe, directed entirely at me. I saw it pooling against the dam I had built in my own heart. And I saw what the dam was made of. Every self-critical thought was another brick. "I'm so stupid" was a layer of mortar. "I don't deserve to feel better" was the final, impenetrable stone. I was so busy punishing myself, so stubbornly focused on my own failure, that I refused to let his healing love wash over me. I didn't feel worthy of it, and in my pride, I made my own feelings of unworthiness a more powerful reality than his unwavering love for me. The vision shifted. Now I was in my own backyard on a perfect summer evening. Brandon was at the grill, Katie was chasing a firefly, and the sky was painted with the most breathtaking sunset. It was a moment of perfect, simple beauty. I saw myself standing there, phone in my hand, scrolling through emails from the school. A wave of love and gratitude, a gift from God in that moment, was offered to me in the purple and orange hues of the sky. It was an invitation to simply be still, to breathe, to receive the joy of my own beautiful, ordinary life. But my mind was already building another dam, a dam of distraction. I was so preoccupied with the to-do list for tomorrow that I missed the gift of right now. The visions faded, leaving me in his presence once more, my soul aching with the truth. I saw a lifetime of moments just like those, moments where I was too busy, too distracted, too guilty, or too proud to simply be still and receive the love that was always, always, always being offered to me, as constant and reliable as the rising of the sun. I had been trying to earn a love that was already mine for free, trying to climb a mountain when all I had ever been asked to do was lie in a field of grace. Tears, born of this new, heartbreaking understanding, filled my spiritual eyes. I looked at him, the man made of light, and finally surrendered the last of my pride. "No," I whispered, the admission a crack in the dam. Not really, I didn't know how. His smile was pure grace, a warmth that sealed the crack in my soul with pure acceptance. "It is the hardest and simplest thing for a soul to do," he communicated, his love washing over my sorrow. "Just to be loved." A newfound peace settled over me as the truth of the first lesson was sealed in my soul. I felt like a student who had just grasped a beautiful, life-altering concept. But the lesson was not over. The gentle, patient presence of Jesus shifted, the light that composed him growing more focused, more serious. The warmth was still there, but now it was imbued with a profound sense of purpose. This next truth was not just for my own healing, it was for the healing of the world I had left behind. His gaze went even deeper into me, past the freshly healed wounds of my own heart and out toward my relationship with others. "The second question," he communicated, his voice now carrying a quiet urgency, "did you see me in the people I sent to you?" Again, my earthly mind, my ego, scrambled to defend itself. Like a student desperate to prove she'd done the reading, I immediately began assembling a list of my good deeds. I tried to be kind, Lord. I was nice to my neighbors. I volunteered at the church food drive every Thanksgiving. I always smiled at the cashier. The list was a pathetic shield of my own righteousness, and I held it up before him, hoping it would be enough. He didn't silence me this time, he didn't need to. He simply showed me the truth behind my words, and my flimsy shield of good intentions evaporated. The scene shifted, and I was plunged into a memory from the previous winter. I was standing in the bright, warm foyer of a grocery store, pulling on my gloves, the pleasant feeling of a completed errand settling over me. But then Jesus changed my perspective. I was no longer in my own well-fed, warmly clothed body. I was outside on the frozen pavement, and I was inside the consciousness of a man huddled against the brick wall. The immersion was total and shocking. I felt the brutal, biting wind slice through his thin, soiled coat, a cold so deep it seemed to settle in his very bones. I felt the gnawing, acidic ache of a hunger that had gone on for days. I smelled the sour scent of his unwashed body, a smell that served as a constant, humiliating reminder of his station. And worst of all, I felt the sharp, invisible cuts of 1,000 glances that looked through him, the soul-crushing weight of being utterly invisible to the warm, happy people bustling past. Then I felt my own approach. Through his eyes, I saw Eleanor Vance walk out of the store, her face a mask of mild, respectable pity mixed with an unmistakable current of annoyance. I felt his flicker of hope and the immediate sting of humiliation as I avoided his gaze, fumbling in my purse. I experienced the cold, impersonal clink of a dollar coin dropping into his cup. It was not a gift, it was a transaction designed to alleviate my own discomfort, a way to purchase a clean conscience so I could get to my warm van without having to truly engage. It was a gesture of dismissal, not of connection. Jesus then pulled my consciousness out of the man and allowed me to see him as I was, a spirit observing the scene. Now look again, Eleanor, he urged. I looked at the man, but this time with the eyes of my heart. And I saw it. Inside his chest, beneath the layers of dirt and despair, was a tiny, flickering flame, a spark of divine light that was battered but not extinguished. It was the same light that was in me. He was not a problem to be solved or a nuisance to be avoided. He was a child of God, hurting and alone. As this truth dawned on me, the man slowly lifted his head and looked directly at me. For a breathtaking instant, his weary, grizzled face transformed, melting into the luminous, sorrowful face of Jesus himself, looking back at me with all the love and disappointment of a king I had failed to recognize. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. I hadn't just given $1 to a stranger, I had walked right past my God. The devastating image of Jesus' face in the homeless man's eyes was still seared into my consciousness when the scene dissolved and reformed around me. I was now in the teacher's break room at my school, the familiar smell of stale coffee and microwave popcorn in the air. A coworker, a woman I had always found particularly grating, was in the middle of a long, juicy story about another teacher's personal struggles. As she spoke, Jesus showed me myself, standing by the counter, a polite, plastic smile fixed on my face. But he also let me feel the truth of my own heart in that moment, the impatience, the condescension, the silent, cutting judgment. Here she goes again, my thoughts echoed. Doesn't she have anything better to do than tear other people down? My judgment was a stone wall. But then Jesus gently passed me through it and placed me inside my coworker's soul. The experience was jarring and deeply sad. I felt a loneliness so profound it was like a constant, low-grade fever. I felt her desperate, aching need to be seen, to be the center of attention, if only for a moment. Her gossip wasn't a sword she wielded with malice. It was a pathetic crutch she used to feel interesting, to feel connected. In the heart of her desperate need for validation, I saw it again, that same tiny, flickering flame of divinity. He was in her too, not in her unkind words, but in the deep wound from which those words sprang, crying out for compassion instead of condemnation. The vision shifted again, and this time the pain was more intimate, more acute. I was on the sofa in my own living room, late at night. The TV was on, its muted light flickering across the room. Brandon was next to me, trying to tell me about a problem at his job, a frustrating conflict with his boss. I saw myself nodding along, making vague, encouraging noises. Wow, that's tough, but my real attention was on the phone in my hand, my thumb absently scrolling through a sea of meaningless updates. I was a phantom presence, a hollow echo in the room. Then Jesus gave me a gift of terrible clarity. He allowed me to see my husband's face, not as the familiar face I'd seen for 23 years, but as the face of a vulnerable soul reaching out in a moment of need. I saw the hope in his eyes as he started to talk, and I saw the subtle, heartbreaking shift as he realized I wasn't really there with him. I saw his shoulders slump almost imperceptibly as he gave up, turning his gaze back to the silent television. He had come to me for connection, and I had given him a polite dismissal. Jesus was there in my own husband's quiet plea to be heard, and I, in my self-absorbed distraction, had completely missed him. Scene after scene then flashed before me in a rapid, heartbreaking montage. The rude, exhausted cashier at the store, whose sharpness I had met with my own silent anger. The difficult, demanding parent at school, whose aggression I had seen as an attack rather than a cry of fear for her child. my own daughter Katie, in the middle of a teenage meltdown, whose dramatic tears I had dismissed as manipulation instead of seeing the real pain behind them. In every single person I had found difficult, inconvenient, or invisible, Jesus was there, looking back at me, waiting, hopping to be seen. The visions stopped. I was back in his presence, and my soul could no longer contain the grief of my own blindness. I began to sob, a deep, sorrowful cry for a lifetime of missed opportunities. I didn't see you, I wept, the confession pouring out of me. I'm so sorry, I saw their flaws, I saw my own judgment, I didn't even look for you. His love washed over my sorrow. It didn't erase the painful truth, but it covered it in a blanket of mercy. My child, he communicated, his voice a symphony of grace. The entire world is filled with me, hiding in plain sight in the hearts of my people. Your only job was never to judge them, but simply to look for me with the eyes of your heart. I took a moment, suspended in his presence, letting the truth of the second lesson settle into the very fabric of my being. The world was not a collection of strangers, allies, and annoyances. It was a sacred landscape filled with hidden reflections of God, and I had been walking through it with my eyes closed. I felt humbled, stripped bare of my judgments, and strangely peaceful. Finally, I looked up at the man made of light, ready for the final question. The atmosphere shifted again. The loving intensity of his gaze softened into something incredibly tender, hushed, and intimate. His eyes were now filled with a profound sadness, but it was a shared sadness, the sorrow of one who had walked the same path of pain. The light around us seemed to quiet itself, drawing in, creating a sacred, private space for this last, most personal revelation. And the third question, Eleanor, he communicated, his voice now a soft whisper that touched the deepest and most guarded part of my soul. What did you do with the wounds I allowed? I was completely lost, my wounds. The question made no sense. My mind, still a clumsy earthly instrument, fumbled for meaning. I thought of the silvery scar on my knee from when I fell off my bike as a 7-year-old. I thought of petty slights, of friendships that had faded, of moments of disappointment. But I knew with a deep and growing unease that wasn't what he meant. My entire life I had understood wounds to be liabilities, damages to be healed, hidden, or overcome. The idea that a wound was something I was supposed to do something with, that it was a tool given to me, was a concept so alien I could not grasp it. Seeing my confusion, he didn't explain with words. He showed me. He gently reached into my soul and touched the deepest wound of my life. In an instant, I was 19 years old again. I was standing under the harsh, fluorescent lights of a hospital waiting room, the sterile smell of antiseptic burning my nostrils. I could feel the cold, sticky vinyl of the chair beneath my hands. A doctor, his face a mask of professional exhaustion, was speaking words to my mother, but they sounded like they were coming from the end of a long tunnel. Massive coronary, there was nothing we could do. My father gone. I relived the shocking, disorienting blow of it, the feeling of the solid ground of my world turning to dust beneath my feet. I felt the cold, silent numbness that followed the moment I made a subconscious vow. I will never feel a pain like this again. I will not let this break me. I will be strong. Jesus showed me that vow, and he showed me what it had built. I saw a vision of my own heart, and around the place where my father's memory lived, I had constructed a thick, high wall of stone. I had spent years building it, meticulously placing each stone of denial, distraction, and stoicism. And then he showed me the pain itself. It wasn't a memory, it was a tangible thing, a sharp, heavy, dark stone that I had picked up that day in the hospital. For 28 years, I had carried it in the pocket of my soul. I never talked about it, I never showed it to anyone. I thought guarding it, protecting that wall, was the definition of being strong. I thought that by refusing to let the pain touch the rest of my life, I had conquered it. Jesus, with heartbreaking tenderness, showed me that I hadn't conquered it at all. I had enshrined it. I stood before him, the architect of my own emotional prison, finally seeing the high, cold walls I had built around my heart. I saw the sharp, heavy stone of grief I had guarded so diligently. But I still didn't understand the nature of my failure. I had simply protected myself. Wasn't that what it meant to be strong? Jesus answered my unspoken question by showing me another vision, another moment from my life. I was in the school library just last year. A young woman I worked with, a bright, kind soul named Sarah, had found me shelving books. I relived the moment in perfect detail. I saw the fear in her young eyes, the way her hands trembled as she told me the news. They found something, she'd said, her voice barely a whisper. My dad, it's cancer. I remember the wave of awkward sympathy I felt. I remember placing a hand on her arm and offering the safe, generic words society teaches us to use in the face of another's pain. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'll be praying for you. And then I had made an excuse and walked away, leaving her alone in her terror. It was a kind gesture, but Jesus showed me what it could have been. He showed me the dark, heavy stone of my own grief for my father. But then, as I watched the scene replay, he showed me a miracle. The stone in my soul began to glow, and it stretched, transforming into a luminous, shining bridge that extended from the walled-off part of my own heart directly to hers. I saw the path that I had refused to take. I heard the words I could have spoken, words that my own pain had gifted me. I know how scared you are. I lost my dad suddenly when I was just a little older than you. I understand that feeling like the world is ending. I saw the profound, life-giving comfort that would have flowed across that bridge of shared pain. I could have entered her heart and mourned with her in a way no one else could. But I didn't. I kept my bridge for myself. I guarded my wound instead of giving it away as a gift. The vision shifted, showing me another wasted wound. He took me back to my first year as a teacher's aide, to a humiliating moment where I had made a huge mistake in front of the whole class and the lead teacher had berated me. He made me feel the hot sting of that shame all over again. Then he showed me a new teacher's aide last month, making a similar mistake and weeping in the break room. I had patted her on the back and said, "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it." I had offered encouragement from a position of strength. But my old wound of failure could have been a bridge. I could have said, "Let me tell you about the time I messed up even worse. You are not alone." I had chosen to hide my scars instead of using them to show another person where the healing could begin. The visions faded, and Jesus' truth filled my entire being. Our deepest pains are not punishments, he communicated, his voice a symphony of love and sorrow. They are assignments. They are the tools I give you to heal a broken world. The loneliness you have felt is the very thing that qualifies you to comfort another who feels alone. The failure that once crushed you is what gives you the humility to lift up another who has fallen. The grief that shattered your heart is what carves out the space within you to hold the grief of another. I saw it so clearly then, a truth so simple and so revolutionary it dismantled my entire understanding of strength. My whole life I had been trying to hide my wounds, to pretend they didn't exist. I thought they made me weak, fragile, and unlovable. But Jesus showed me that my wounds, when offered in love, were meant to be my greatest strength, the source of my deepest compassion, the very evidence of my connection to the rest of suffering humanity. The three truths settled around me, and I saw my life in the full, stark clarity of heaven's light. I had no words. For a long, timeless moment, all I could do was cry. The tears were not for any single failure, but for the totality of my blindness. My life's entire operating system had been written in a corrupt code. I was designed to be a receiver of love, but had spent my life trying to be a worthy earner of it. I was designed to be a seeker of the divine in others, but had spent my life as a judge of their flaws. I was designed to be a healer with my wounds, but had spent my life as a warden of my own pain. I had failed. It was not a feeling, it was a fact, as solid and real as the love that surrounded me. I had failed on all three questions, the only questions that mattered. I was a complete and utter failure. I finally lifted my gaze to meet his, my soul braced for the inevitable conclusion. I expected to see disappointment in his eyes. I expected a gentle sadness, a sorrowful shaking of the head, the loving but firm verdict that I was not ready, that I had missed the point of it all. In a universe of such perfect love, what place was there for a soul who had so profoundly failed to live it? I was ready to be sent away. But there was no disappointment in his gaze. There was no verdict. There was only love. It was a love so deep, so wide, so impossibly vast that it saw the entirety of my failure and was utterly unmoved by it. It was a love that could hold every broken piece of me, every selfish motive, every act of blindness, and still, somehow, call me beautiful. He spoke no words of comfort, he performed an act of it. He drew me into an embrace, a hug of pure, living light. And in that embrace, my sense of self dissolved. I was no longer Eleanor, the failed soul, and he was no longer Jesus, the perfect being. We were one. I felt myself melting into his light, and in that dissolution, I was not annihilated. I was finally, truly made whole. Every fear, every failure, every last molecule of shame was burned away, not by a punishing fire, but by the overwhelming, unconditional radiance of his being. It was there, inside that perfect union, that he communicated the final, most important truth. Eleanor, the thought bloomed within me, a truth that rewrote my entire existence. This is not a judgment, it is an awakening. He explained it all in a single, instantaneous download of understanding. Earth was not a testing ground where we are graded on our performance. It was a school for the heart, a divine gymnasium for the soul. The curriculum had only one subject: love. My failures were not sins on a ledger, they were the painful, necessary lessons in that curriculum. I could not have learned how to receive love without first understanding the dams I had built. I could not have learned to see him in others without first confronting my own blindness. I could not have learned the purpose of my wounds without first feeling the pain of guarding them. It is not about being perfect. It is about the messy, heartbreaking, beautiful process of learning to love. The embrace softened and my sense of self returned, but it was new. It was Klein. I was no longer a soul defined by my failures, but one defined by the grace that had covered them. I was no longer a failed student. I was a graduate, finally understanding the purpose of the school I had been attending all my life. Jesus looked at me, his smile containing all the joy of a teacher whose beloved student has finally understood the lesson. And he spoke the words that ended my education and began my true life's work. Now you know. Now I knew the knowledge was a fire in my soul, a new compass pointing to a true north I had never understood before. And with that knowledge came a desire more powerful than any I had ever felt, the desire to stay. To remain in this place of perfect love, to never again return to the world of shadows where I would have to stumble and try to remember this perfect clarity. I was a graduate, but the thought of leaving the school was unbearable. I begged him, my soul cried out with a desperation and honesty I had never known on earth. Please, I wept into his light. Don't make me go back, I want to stay with you. I'm so tired and I'm afraid I'll forget. I'm afraid I'll fail all over again. He held me, and in that embrace, I felt the first real rest I'd ever had, a complete cessation of striving. I know, little one, he communicated, his compassion a balm on my terror. But your work is not done. This awakening was not just for you. He looked at me then, not with a command, but with a gaze of profound trust, a commissioning. Your family needs you. They are lost in the same way you were. They need to learn what love looks like. You have seen it now, go and show them. Go and live the answers to these questions. A final, beautiful promise bloomed in my soul. You will not be alone, I will be with you. I felt the heartbreak of leaving him then. It was a grief so profound, it made the pain of my father's death feel like a shadow. It was the deepest sadness a soul can feel, the sadness of being exiled from home. But I knew I had to. He smiled at me one last time, his eyes conveying an eternity of love. And then I felt that pull again, but this time it was backward, away from the light. It was not the gentle, loving summons that had brought me here. This was a wrenching, irresistible force, pulling me back into a reality I no longer wanted. The perfect peace began to fracture. The beautiful, orderly world of light began to stretch and distort, its colors smearing like wet paint. The man made of light, my home, my king, grew more distant with every passing instant, until he was once again a single, brilliant star, and then he was gone. The peace did not fade gently, it shattered. The first thing to pierce the divine silence was a sound, a harsh, rhythmic, metallic beeping that was an insult to the celestial music I had just heard. Then came pain. A terrible, crushing agony erupted in my head, and a violent, brutal pressure slammed into my chest. The world rushed back in, not as a gentle dawn, but as a violent explosion of sensory chaos. Light, blinding and sterile, assaulted my awareness. It was the cold, unforgiving glare of a fluorescent light in a hospital room. A machine next to me was beeping frantically. A woman in scrubs, her face a mask of urgent concentration, was shouting. "We've got a pulse, I think we've got a pulse, she's back, she's back." I gasped, a ragged, tearing intake of air that felt like swallowing fire and ice. My lungs burned. My body was impossibly heavy, cold, and wet. I could feel hands on me, the cold shock of a stethoscope on my chest. I was no longer a free soul in a realm of light. I was a prisoner locked back inside a broken, painful cage of flesh. I was back. My husband was there. His face, which had been a mask of terror when I left, was now buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with ragged, exhausted sobs. He looked up when he heard the nurses shout, his eyes wide with a disbelief that was almost as painful as his grief. He rushed to my side and grabbed my hand, his grip a desperate, anchoring force. "Eleanor, oh my God, can you hear me?" I tried to speak, but my throat was raw and my body was a foreign country I yet know how to operate. I just nodded, and a single hot tear traced a path through the grime on my cheek. I was so confused, so violently torn between two worlds. One second, I was held in the arms of God. The next, I was in this cold, loud, painful room. And so I began to weep, but the tears were a strange and complex mixture, tears of profound loss for the paradise I had been exiled from, and tears of overwhelming gratitude for a second chance to get it right. The doctors had no categories for what had happened. They spoke in hushed, amazed tones to Brandon, using words like massive brain aneurysm and medically inexplicable. They told him I had been clinically dead for at least 11 minutes, that they had been preparing to tell my family I was gone. They pointed to scans and charts, showing no reason why I should be alive, let alone have zero brain damage. They kept using the word miracle, but it was a word they used to label a mystery, not to explain it. I knew what it wasn't a miracle, it was a mission. It's been a year since that day. On the outside, my life looks mostly the same. I still live in the same house with the leaky faucet. I still work at the same school, surrounded by the smell of crayons. But on the inside, in the quiet, unseen places of my heart, everything is different. I am no longer a conductor of a symphony. I am a student, learning to listen for the music. When my husband tells me about his day, I put down my phone, look into his eyes, and search for the flicker of divinity I know is there. When a student is difficult or a parent is angry, I try to quiet my own judgment and ask a new question. What is the wound that is causing this pain? I have begun, slowly and imperfectly, to talk about my father. I have taken the heavy stone from my pocket and have tried to build a few small bridges with it. I fail often. The old dams are easy to rebuild out of habit and fear, but now I know. I came back with a message. Jesus told me to go and show them, and that includes you. I cannot show you the face of God, but I can give you the roadmap He gave me. It's a message for you contained in the 3 questions He asked me, and now I ask them of you. First, are you letting Him love you? Right now, in this very moment. No matter what you've done, no matter how unworthy you feel, His love is a warm, golden river pouring out for you. Are you going to keep reinforcing the dams of shame, guilt, and distraction, or will you have the courage to let the river in? Second, where is He hiding in your life? Is he in the face of the person who annoys you the most? Is he in the cry for help from a friend you feel you're too busy for? Is he in the eyes of your own child, your husband, your wife, pleading for your undivided attention? Are you willing to look for him with the eyes of your heart? I promise you he's there, hiding in plain sight, waiting to be seen. And last, what about your deepest wound? The pain you hide from everyone, the failure that broke you, the grief you think you have to carry alone forever. Are you going to keep guarding it like a prisoner, locked behind a stone wall? Or are you going to offer it up and let God turn it into sacred medicine for a hurting world? That pain is not your shame, it is your assignment. It is your bridge. These questions are not a judgment. They are an awakening. Heaven is real, and the love waiting for you there is more beautiful than anything you can possibly imagine. But you do not have to wait until you die to experience a piece of it. He is asking you to live in that love today. He is not waiting to judge you. He's waiting to love you. Please just let him.